Good morning from Cambodia. My name is Ros Sayumphu, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Camtech University in Cambodia. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizer as well as Dr. Alex for inviting me to talk in this conference. I'm very delighted and honored to be part of the panelists. Um, Without further ado, let's dive into today's topic that I'm going to be presenting soon. So the topic is data ethics in aerial archaeology at Angkor. So as an introduction, as you know that archaeology has been progressively quite advanced up until now. In the past, if you trace back, you can see that a lot of archaeological work has been done or relating with excavation um, and work at the site, for example. But now with the advancement of digital technology, there are new ways that archaeologists can use, saving them time in a quicker manner. Um, and this happened to be aerial digital archaeology. Also, it's important to know that, for example, LiDAR, um, they are non-destructive, which means when you can fly and take over the photography or scanning of the aerial survey, then you can remove the tree cover afterward using special software like ArcGIS, for example. And all of these is considered to be aerial digital archaeology. But my focus is not how the technical aspect works. Of course, I have to understand the system and the procedures so and so, but my interest is more of the ethical side, using theory, actor network theory, to understand how the data is properly collected, processed, for example. So the idea is to examine, as you can see in the goal here, to examine how aerial digital archaeology, specifically at Angkor, Cambodia, one of the World Heritage Sites, using either drone, LiDAR, or satellite, all of these produce into an objective knowledge or what we call scientific knowledge. But whether or not that reflects the reality, because during the process of data collection or data analysis, data interpretation, there are power dynamic within those network, within those process. And if it is happened to be not neutral, for example, it's biased, or maybe it shouldn't be considered as a scientific objective. How does one reconcile and how can we move forward to data ethics and to have epistemic justice? So all of these are part of the research problem that I'm dealing with. But to wrap up, for example, I wanted to understand if there's any weak ethical or governing framework, or is there any proper governing framework in place in Cambodia that sort of protect the data and also provide accessibility for the local if needed, or if the LiDAR technology, when being used, cause a newer ethical challenges emerge. For example, it could be disturbing where the ancestor rests, for example, flying over them considered to be not respectful. Or maybe LiDAR itself, when being used, but the extraction and interpretation of data normally is outside of the survey location because the data need to be shipped out of the country to another country where the foreign expert came from, do the analysis on their own, quite distant from the local interpretation, or maybe not involving the local in terms of interpretation and data analysis because the data is now tailored toward this new technology or what can this new technology accommodate in terms of data. So maybe it can be too materialistic, but not of the intangible aspect, for example, that might not reflect what the local believes, what the local knew, or the local epistemology, the local knowledge can be hindered. It also lead to sovereignty underdeveloped, for example. And this links to, for example, for led project dominant tools interpretation, which I already explained. This could lead to colonialism as well as marginalizing the local expert, the local scholars, the local community. And all of these will be done through the social technical network, because normally when we look into archaeology, we look into the technical aspect. What do we find from the excavation? What do we find from the data? But my focus is more of tracing the network of human and non-human. How do they involve? How does what we consider to be a scientific objective result? Is it true? To what extent that we understand of these hidden ethical what or hidden political asymmetry, which may affect the result as well, which more or less haven't really thoroughly thought of in the Cambodian community for the very least. So as for the theoretical framework, here I would like to stress that I will be using actor network theory. It's just called an STS, Science Technology Studies, because when we apply actor network theory, the theory argues that human and non-human agency holds a symmetrical value, but when they are interact within a network, because human need to use tool, pickaxe, or use drone, or use camera, or use other types of technology in order to get the final archaeological product, the result, for example. Without these non-human agency or the technology itself, the result will be different, or the result could be not the same if we don't have a proper or enough equipment, or in different contexts, different environment, for example. So this theory allow us to look into the social technical network, bring out the black box that we normally missed, that may cause or produce the ethical void and power asymmetry. This paper or this research will also look into a practice of discourse analysis to look into research project that also happen to have embedded with colonial narrative or hidden power within the report publication, or more or less wanting people to view the scientific result as a scientific knowledge, but it may already been biased or linked toward the marginalization of the local epistemology, for example, which has not been thoroughly captured. Third, is also linked to situated knowledge and reflexive engagement of the author, myself from the third world and developing country, to see or to experience in the fieldwork that I've been participated in, and triangulate these practice with a document and discourse to give a say from a third world perspective that the system itself may be biased or maybe not able to uphold or value the local epistemology enough. And with this new technology coming in, such as LiDAR, it's further distant the use, the appreciation, the acknowledgement of the local epistemology to be used within the system of LiDAR itself. So the data source, as I mentioned, there are two primary data and secondary data. Primary data, I will look into institutional and legal artifacts, for example, law, code of conduct, as well as technical and spatial artifacts, reflexive field note that I've been involving, as well as secondary data as academic literature, case study, literature, policy report. To give you a better perspective, because we are talking about social technical network, we're talking about human and non-human, human and tool, human and law and agency, which all of these, when become a network and they become naturalized, become stabilized, configured, we accept that every process that have been through this network and become an outcome itself, we accept that as objective or scientific, for example. But by looking or re-examine the process itself, we can see better, for example, who is designing the project, whether it's the foreign archaeologists or whether the Khmer scholars or an institution called Apsara, for example. These are the Cambodian actors that involved within cultural preservation. Or maybe the project is led by foreign archaeologists and the research design was not consulted before being implemented, or it was not disclosed well. And because of the technology, because of the expensive LiDAR, for example, the pathway of doing the data collection or the flight path that we're going to use will be tailored toward the preference of the LiDAR instead of what the local people needs. That is also some of the area that I've been looking into. The data itself, like the report authorship, whether it's all comes from the foreign archaeologists or there's a chance of the Cambodian author to be part of the authorship as well as to be able to access to the information. Because sometimes when we do LiDAR data collection and data interpretation, more time than not that the local researcher may have the field report, but not the complete raw data, but more of the interpretive version. But the interpretive version from one author, from one scholar to another are different. But if we accept that from only one foreign author, for example, is true, but that doesn't mean that it's reflect what the local belief and how do we mitigate with the local epistemology, local belief. So these are also the issue that we need to think of when new technology are coming in. It can further exemplify or increase the chance of marginalizing the local epistemology, the output of the data or the special data set. It doesn't directly translate or understand the local epistemology. A rock in a forest may consider to be a rock for the data set, for the LiDAR, but the same rock can mean different things for the local community. It could mean spirit, for example, a spirit that they respect. All of these will be taken into consideration as a data source. So the analysis process, I have done systematic document review, discourse analysis to identify gap narrative that I mentioned. ANT network mapping show how human and non-human and laws, institution, they interact with one another, and the reflexive engagement triangulate the practice and report to see whether it's true. So far from my research, what have I gathered? So there's a few key insights. The first one being is that the digital archaeology is confirmed that it's a social network, for example, because it's not the work of only archaeologists, but it involves with other actors and institutions. The archaeologists themselves now has also depend on a lot of advanced technology for photogrammetry, for example, 3D modeling. LiDAR aerial survey is just one part of the component, not to mention the underwater archaeology and the use of drone, the use of underwater drone to collect data. But we are here to only focus on LiDAR and the aerial survey. Even so, we can see that, for example, in the Cambodian case, in order for the foreigner to come into Cambodia and do the survey, they need to go through institution where, for example, Apsara is under the Ministry of Culture and Fine Art, and they're the one who decide whether or not they can proceed with the project or their research design. But more or less because the research design has been pre-designed and then put forward for the authority, but more consideration and more effort could have been put into as not serving as a facilitator of the project, but more of taking an authoritative role to really need to understand why the foreign PI, the foreign project principal, for example, they designed this project. How does it really benefit the local community? I think more effort in that sense would have been better and more encouraged. And if you look at the LiDAR workflow, from the data collection to the process and return as a publication or a field report itself, I don't think it's enough. Because the data collected may be due to the vested interest of the researcher that they want to only to survey that area, but the area may not be what it's a pressing need for the local, and maybe there's no capacity building for the local scholars and the local community to understand the LiDAR system. Because without understanding the LiDAR system, it also means that the local community cannot contribute their knowledge for the interpretation. Therefore, the interpretation is already missed and only favored to those who is able to explain and interpret the data set coming out of this sophisticated technology. Reflexive field note that I've observed is that local archaeologists, because of their limited, for example, understanding of the language, their capacity is still limited, and because of the tool, that foreign tool, modern technology that has been brought by the foreign archaeologists or researcher to Cambodia, was very expensive, so they are not there to touch it, even with consent, for example. So these are all of the sort of barrier hinders, and we can see from this socio-technical network that there's a power dynamic that we are not aware of, or it's in a black box. And through this ANT mapping, like I've explained, the human, the tool, the actor, the macro, the micro actor works in a single network to produce the knowledge or the knowledge production itself, which is not entirely objective as it seems. So key insight number 2, if we look into the Cambodian law, like the 1966 Heritage Law or the Research Code of Conduct, it is true that the authority has been very precise and comprehensive in terms of excavation, conservation, so and so. But because of the new advancement of the technology, the question is, without a proper clause, a proper article dedicated to consider what is digital heritage, how do we do with the data archive, and with this new technology potentially changing the meaning of archaeology, for example, how do we reconcile that? That is still a gap. And in reality, the data sometimes is stored in a foreign server because sometimes it's too expensive. The local scholars rely on foreign access to ask for the foreign approval. Sometimes we have a copy, sometimes we don't. So all of these pose a problem, even though we are the sort of descendant of the cultural heritage that is on our land, for example. So where the law is absent, ethical void appear. As I mentioned, it's not a direct things that we can see with our naked eye, but through the network tracing process, we can understand that power dynamic tend to shift the knowledge production, and it favors those who have potential, have the technology and the means to do so. So the network reconfigure around the foreign control. So key insight number 3, as you can see, that tools like LiDAR, they are not neutral. And if anything, they mediate power and they exclude as well. So they control by foreign institution, they control by those experts that are able to do the interpretation, collection, so and so. But those that can do, particularly foreigner, they are not the local, they don't know the ins and outs, they don't know the local, or they don't know enough, or they don't know the authentic meaning, the intangible side of things, as the local knows. So these are also the area of concern. And when we present the LiDAR dataset as scientific or objective, and when the local researcher, again, I repeat this again and again, cannot access and interpret the raw data independently, the interpretation put in the project report and publication become more leaning toward used by other scholars. And this might affect, marginalize further the local researcher knowledge or epistemology, because it can be seen as secondary, for example. And we can see from the reflective field note, we can see that the local team often see LiDAR result at the end of the project. The raw, because of the limited access of technology, limited access of time, which I said that it is also about economical. If we don't have, the LiDAR is expensive, we need to take care of LiDAR and its data more than how the local community perspective on things are sometimes. So this is not balanced already. We focus on which one is more expensive. I tend to put more priority on that instead of having a co-construction of knowledge, even though we have an expensive data set or technology to process the data set, but at the same time, it's also as important to work with the local and extract the real or the authentic meaning or their version of of the LiDAR result, of the result of the whatever that has been extracted. So LiDAR is a tool that mediates access and exclusion while also reinforcing asymmetry. So to sum up, what does that mean? So it means that it poses an ethical challenges in aerial archaeology itself. With this new technology coming in, it doesn't mean that, of course, it is, I agree 100% that it's non-destructive and it's a new way, it's a fast way for archaeologists to find or extract data. But at the same time, this new, fast, and what we consider to be efficient might lead to other concerns. For example, parachute science, where the researcher just come in, extract the data, leave, publish without any connection or consideration of the local people, for example. This make the network disconnected, but at the same time, the knowledge about the local itself or the subject of that being studied is not well represented. Second is the knowledge gap. As I again and again mentioned, the local exclude from the data interpretation and access. And on top of that, we have paywall, we have IP right because of those who own the data LiDAR, who bring the LiDAR, who can purchase LiDAR and use that to extract data. They hold the IP right or other types of right, for example. It's also difficult for the local to access to those kind of data. Privacy and dual use. As LiDAR also non-destructive, of course, but at the same time, it reveals sensitive side or maybe disturb the side that the local people are respected. Maybe flying a drone over a grave of a past ancestor is considered to be sensitive or considered to be not allowed, but you do it anyway without having consent, for example. This is also an issue. Or maybe the data itself can be used for other purposes beyond archaeology, but to more security aspect. Moreover, it can also lead, because of there's a code of conduct gap, it doesn't distinguish what is aerial archaeology or how do we protect privacy or how do we involve the local or how do we retain the digital heritage data, for example. This is not properly or thoroughly mentioned within the conduct. So also can lead to ethics challenges. So within that, there is a tendency, not just the ethical challenges, but at the same time, it could result in digital colonialism, where foreign university coming in or provide the funding or give the funding or funding from other international institution, they also act as a publisher, but at the same time a gatekeeper because they hold the authority with the funding, with the condition to publish, the condition to share data, so on and so. Also, within this, again, the local researcher relegated into a mere assistant. And this is not a new case. Within Cambodia, for example, if we trace back to the colonial period, we can see that the local researcher back in the colonial period, when the French came, they treat the local as a merely assistant or just someone who lead them the way. But instead, they are the people they already knew that the majestic temple are there and what's its meaning. It's just that their knowledge and their epistemology was not being considered by the colonizer. Third, it's or the authority back then. So third, we talked about community excluded from the subject because the object, like I mentioned earlier on, like it could be a mound, it could be a rock, but that rock is not just a spatial landscape or natural landscape. Of course it is, but because of the community, because of the local people, they make meaning out of it. The intangible side, it could be spirit. These sort of things also need to be protected. So what can we do as a solution? So there's a couple of things that worth considering. So number one, for Cambodia case anyway, and this is, I believe, also applied to other developing country or the third world global south, that from the research design to the data collection to the interpretation, it could be co-lead. or if not, the Cambodian can lead the project with the assistance from the foreign institution or as a technical assistant, for example. Or in other case, the MOU between the institution within Cambodia that allows permit or those coming from the outside that are interested in the research in Cambodia, might need to be tightened, focusing on data sovereignty clause as well, or such as thinking about having a raw data access for the local as well, or having a national repository, because we also need to have our own archive. If not, it's going to be difficult going back asking for access, and to some extent, sometimes this access abroad is not well kept, and it also might be an issue for us Cambodian to find or to recall what has been already studied. Number three, the co-creation. As I mentioned, the local and foreign scholars need to collaborate in the design, analysis, and dissemination throughout the process instead of just one particular aspect. As we can see, if you do the mapping, there's a potential point of gatekeeping since the research design, data collection, data interpretation, data analysis, data dissemination. All of them are considered to be links between human and non-human agency, but at the same time, they are the gatekeeping sort of from one step to another too, which is crucial for the local and foreign scholars to work together at all procedural aspects. Number four, transparency. Again, this in relation to crediting the locals, properly enforcing the code of conduct and published method, for example. And last but not least, the capacity building, which is very crucial. This is also to help with avoiding parachute science, because you can show that you are trying to make the local also strengthening their stewardship toward their own cultural heritage by training, doing tech transfer, and encouraging the local to co-publish with, for example, the foreign scholars. So on and all, it goes to show that LiDAR and digital archaeology they are double-edged. It's not just scientific and objective. Of course, they do provide a scientific result that we see from the data set, but it doesn't reveal the hidden story. It doesn't bring the indigenous side of things or intangible side of things to play. And it's also risk having the colonial narrative and leads to the asymmetry. Another conclusion that we can make out of it is that by using actor network theory, it helps us to open up the black box of how data is being produced, collected, or kept. And it shows who and what shapes the archaeological truth, which by all means in history, it's tend to change when we have new evidence. So even the data set, if there's any new evidence coming in or different types of LiDAR tool being used, could be the data could also be different. Last but not least, what I also encourage everyone here or be mindful about or take into consideration is when we know the network that we are tracing that I've shown, what we can do is to contribute to a more balanced network so that we can have a more balanced narrative, particularly for those who are coming from the global south. So I would like to end my presentation here. Apology that I couldn't be there online, present there physically via Zoom. But should there be any question, I'm more than happy to help. I'm sure that I think you can get my email from Dr. Alex or the organizer. Once again, I'm very happy to join this conference. Should there be any question, do let me know. I'm on standby to answer. And thank you again. Have a great day.